Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Happy to have Jaime and Carole Bricker back, as well as Dr. Scherz for the second portion of our parental communication and engagement seminar. Just so the community knows, this webinar will be recorded and available for the community, understanding that it's a busy time and folks may not necessarily have been able to attend. So with that, I will turn it over to Jaime and Carole Bricker.
Well, thanks very much for the warm introduction, and welcome everyone to Returning to Learning. As mentioned, this is the second webinar in our three-part series. And for some of you, this is your first time you were with us, and so a big welcome. And for all our returnees from our webinar number one, a big welcome back. And the focus tonight is going to be on engaging in communication. And a couple of very heartfelt thank yous coming from this end. A big thank you first to West Orange Public School District for once again being so receptive and so welcoming and so gracious to give us this opportunity to work with you this evening. And also, we'd really like to thank Teacher Coach. We've had a long-standing professional relationship with that organization, and they have been first class from day one right through to the present. So we look forward very much to continuing that into the future. And good evening once again. I'm Jaime Bricker, one of your co-hosts. And my wife, Carole, and I, we are both retired educators, and we live about an hour from Toronto, Ontario. Now, I spent my career in elementary schools, and in the province of Ontario, elementary basically means anything from junior kindergarten up to grade 8. I spent about 2/3 of my career as a teacher in a wide variety of grades. And in the last decade, I served as an elementary school principal.
And I'm Carole Bricker, and as Jaime mentioned, also a retired educator. However, my experience primarily focused in special education, both as a special education teacher and a special education facilitator. Jaime and I are also the parents of 2 adult sons, so we certainly have worn that hat through our educational journey, and I've had opportunities to speak at in various platforms on parent engagement. And for the past 4 years, we've been podcasters on parent engagement, and our podcast is called Bricker by Bricker.
All right, as mentioned, this is the second installment of a 3-part series. Now, our first webinar was all about establishing connections, and that's kind of laying the groundwork that really establishes that trust between home and school, which is so critical for basically everything else we're going to talk about in the next 2 webinars, and more importantly, for your child's success at school. Now, this evening's session is going to focus on engaging in communication, and our final session in a couple of months is going to focus on embracing in collaboration.
And as Jaime mentioned, these 3 foci are very much interconnected, that we need to make sure that we're engaging in all 3 areas in order to have that really strong school-home partnership. And again, our third webinar will be on embracing collaboration on March 16th. So we certainly hope that you'll be able to join us that date as well. And throughout the webinar, we have some designated times where we'll have the opportunity to ask any questions. So one way that you can ask a question is by going to the Q&A section and putting your question in, and feel free to do that as it arises, and we'll get it to that question when we have our designated time. You're welcome to raise your hand and ask your question live, or if you'd rather reach out to us individually, you can do so by emailing us at brickerbybricker@gmail.com.
Now, before we begin with communication, let's take a few minutes and focus on the key points or takeaways from our last session on establishing connections. And of course, the key fundamental question is, what are connections? Well, they are the ongoing relationships between parents and all relevant adults in your child's school. Obviously, you're well aware of your child's teacher. All schools have a principal, many schools have a vice principal, but there are still a variety of other adults that your child is going to deal with from time to time in their school day. Now, connections are the very essence of the homeschool partnership. And as Carole mentioned with our podcast, et cetera, the homeschool partnership is really at the heart of what drives us and what we love about our work. And we can look at it as parents and as educators because it is so important to your child's success. And also these connections help establish and prioritize and further nurture this mutual trust. You believe in the school, they believe in you, and that's how your child is successful. And another key is it's a forum. These connections are a forum to allow kind of open and judgment-free dialogue, both from the parent, from the teacher, from the principal, with everyone working towards the common goal of what's best for your child. I just like to stress that it's never a case of mom and dad versus the school. It's a case of mom and dad and the school working as teammates for the best interests of your child.
So tonight we're going to focus on engaging in communication. And, this is a really important aspect of that connection. And there's a variety of ways that we can be connecting and communicating with our child's teacher, our child's school. One of those being the agenda, and that your children may be using on a regular basis, a great opportunity to share information back and forth, as well as some people like to use email or text messaging. And both of these formats we would use simply to share information or provide reminders. So maybe you've got your child has an appointment, you're going to write to the teacher in their agenda or text them that they're going to be late arriving because of an appointment, or the teacher is reminding you of dates for tests and assignments or any special upcoming events. But another nice thing to be able to do with the agenda or text messaging or email is periodically throughout the year, you could share with the teacher something your child has enjoyed, or maybe something that you've seen your child engaging in that you thought was very positive and very rewarding for your child. And by using these formats and doing that periodically throughout the school year, it again just helps to reinforce that connection and build on that sense of trust. Another form of communication is the telephone call. And you would use this when you need to really discuss something. Perhaps something wasn't clear in the agenda or clear in your email or text. So giving a phone call really helps clear up any questions that you might have and really reduces that opportunity for some disconnection or misunderstanding that could arise when you're using the brief formats of the agenda or text messaging or email.
Now, there's also times, of course, where you want several people involved in a meeting to make sure that everyone's hearing and discussing the same message at the same time. And of course, in pre-pandemic times, which, as we all know, seems like an awful long time ago, we would have an in-person meeting with the teacher and or the principal, whatever the case may be. Whereas nowadays, vast majority of districts have been using virtual conferencing of some sort for the past couple of years. And it still very much meets that need of allowing a group of people to really discuss something and really make sure everyone's hearing, like I say, the same thing at the same time, to really avoid kind of a disconnect or a misunderstanding. Because if you just write or text back and forth when there's a misunderstanding, sometimes you inadvertently kind of widen that misunderstanding. All right, so we're looking at there are some reasons for communication between home and school. And we're gonna briefly mention what I guess we really consider the 6 biggest. And first and foremost, of course, is anything to do with academics, because ultimately that's why schools were built in the first place. And you have a much better sense of what your child is doing at school, and equally importantly, how your child is doing at the work if you are in regular communication with the teacher. And also, you're so much better able to support them at home because you're well aware of what they're doing in school. Now, the second point to consider with communication is the social benefits. And you get a much better sense of how your child is fitting in with his or her peers, and really what kind of attitude your child kind of walks into the classroom with on a daily basis. And I found as a parent, and certainly as an educator, this was a very important reason, this social aspect, because a red flag immediately popped up if the teacher saw a much different personality in my child than Carole and I saw at home. Number 3 is messaging. And this greatly reduces, once again, the likelihood of misunderstandings between home and school, and also these misunderstandings maybe growing into a very large misunderstanding. However, another benefit of regular messaging I found is, particularly as your child gets older, it really makes your child have to be more accountable, because they can't play the old, well, Mom, that's not what the teacher said. Well, Dad, that's not what the principal said, because Mom and Dad know what was said because they're in regular messaging.
Another reason would be the optics, and by having that ongoing communication with your child's teacher and with your child's school, your child is seeing that you're placing a priority on their education and that you really value what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But they also have that sense that you're there and you're going to be supporting them through their educational journey. We've talked about trust and the importance of trust. Well, having that ongoing communication just really helps to increase that sense of trust. And in our previous webinar, we talked about that if your first contact with the school is around a negative situation or a significant issue, it really does send that relationship in a negative way. So it's so important to have that ongoing communication so you can really work to continue building and establishing that trust. But also by having ongoing communication, we really reduce those likelihood of surprises, that something isn't all of a sudden going to happen and you're not aware of it, because having that ongoing communication, what the work assignments are for your child, you have that relationship and that sense of trust with the teacher so that you're able to reduce any surprises that might pop up.
All right, so there are also just some general types or categories of meetings. First, of course, is planned versus spontaneous. And I'd like to stress that the overwhelming majority of meetings you would have with anyone from a school, teacher, principal, or any other adult would absolutely be planned, where all parties would know ahead of time with a specific date and time. Now, in my career, especially looking back to principal days, these spontaneous meetings typically were triggered by an event that occurred after school that the principal was not even aware of. And those, of course, would be walking home and or taking a bus. Something bad happened, your child may have been injured, etc. And you as a parent, understandably, are very agitated and emotional. But in those situations, I wouldn't just immediately physically come to school once you're able to, but I would just call the school and make them aware of the situation, let the school have the time to look into it, get some facts, and they would set up a planned time to meet with you the next day. Now, there's also the idea of who is asking for this meeting, who's initiating it. And obviously, some meetings are initiated by the teacher, the principal, or some other adult in the school, whereas a parent, you absolutely can also request a meeting. And the third and final kind of type is really the size of the meeting. Most meetings are pretty small, obviously. 1 or 2 parents and a given teacher is kind of the standard meeting size. But there are other situations and other issues which are far better addressed by having a group of people. And I would say in a school context, in my career at least, the typical meeting would kind of max out at a handful of people.
So generally, meeting with the teacher, that's your first point of contact. That's the person you're generally going to be in contact with most often, and generally the person you're going to be in contact with first. And by having those meetings with the teacher, again, we talk about how informed you are. Both you as the parent have a better understanding of school, and the teacher has a better understanding of the child at home, which ultimately benefits the child. So you may be contacting the teacher may be contacting you because your child is experiencing some difficulties academically. You also might be in contact with the teacher because of some behavioral or social challenges. And again, the teacher may contact you, or maybe it's something that you are aware of and you want to make sure that the teacher is as well. You might notice that there's been a recent change in effort or attitude in your child. Perhaps they're not getting up in the morning to go to school as they were in the past. And that's really important to share that information with your child's teacher. Similarly, there may be some changes in the home, that perhaps there was a death or maybe a separation and divorce. And that certainly is going to impact your child in the school setting as well. So making sure that that information is available to the teachers so that then they can make the necessary adjustments and accommodations to help your child and bring them forward during that situation. And ultimately, as we say, you know, it really sends that strong message to your child that you're supporting them, as well as the fact that you're seeking that alignment with your child's teacher.
All right, so now let's look at situations which would necessitate a meeting with the principal. As Carole just mentioned, the teacher is any parent's first point of contact. So in terms of meeting with the principal, I want to stress right off the start that the vast majority of parents will never have a meeting or a direct phone call or whatever with the principal. There is simply like the need will not arise. Now, the two situations where the needs do very much arise would be a classroom related issue where you've already met with the teacher, more than likely on several occasions. For whatever the case may be, things have not been resolved to your satisfaction. And then at that point, by all means, you can certainly contact the principal and he or she will then further explore the matter. Now, looking back to my days as a principal, the other big kind of category of items that absolutely land on the principal's desk have to do with student safety. And that, of course, really involves matters that do not really directly occur in the classroom. So the yard, the hallway, bathroom issues. We mentioned earlier, walking to and from school or taking the bus. These can trigger a litany of issues potentially, and those are absolutely a principal's responsibility to address. Now, your child can also have social interaction challenges outside. Carole was referring to in the classroom a minute ago, but maybe your child feels very kind of lonely and isolated at recess time, and maybe feels kind of picked on, whatever the case may be. Those are principal discussion points. As a parent, you may simply want clarification over things like discipline policies and practices. And I want to stress that the principal does not make or establish those types of things. Those are established higher up the chain of command at the district level. The principal's job is to adhere to them and follow them and implement them. But by all means, the principal is more than happy to clarify any questions you might have. You also might have questions about the logistics of the school and different routines. For example, I've had parents come in at different times and ask me about our kiss and ride program where kids got dropped off safely before school, or what's the procedure for someone wanting to pick up a young child after school, those types of things. And finally, what I've really found in my career, and I greatly appreciated, was occasionally a parent would come in, and it would inevitably be on a Monday morning, and they would tell me something that had occurred in their community. Typically, it was their child had been to a party or was out playing with friends, and somehow or another, there'd been a social disconnect, and there were some hard feelings, and things might have escalated. And the parent was now concerned, since all the kids involved are students at our school, that it may carry over and affect what I call the school climate. And I'll tell you, in those cases, the principal greatly appreciates that kind of heads up. And finally, we look at things that would require a meeting with the superintendent. Well, I want to stress that from a parent's point of view, the overwhelming, and I mean overwhelming majority of parents would never have reason to be contacting a superintendent. The primary reason would be if there was a significant issue which you've been discussing with the principal, and once again had multiple meetings, and for whatever reason that issue was not solved to your satisfaction, then would be the time to approach the superintendent, who would obviously listen to your concerns, then contact the principal, and then the superintendent would determine the best path forward.
So when we look at communicating and how we're going to go about communicating with our child's teacher, it reminds me of a practice that we would use in the classroom when we're assessing our students, where we would provide them with what we referred to as 2 stars and a wish. We tell them 2 things that we found that they were doing really well, and then a wish for what we would like to see, an area that may need improvement, or provide those steps for how to complete this next part of whatever it is they're working on. Well, this same approach could be used when you're communicating with your child's teacher or with the school. Start off by sharing something that you've seen or something that your child has done or a success that they've had, and then go into your concern. And this really is a good strategy that works both ways. When the teacher is communicating with you, it's always great if we start with something positive and then continue with something, an area of growth. And that could be the same way that you could approach that at home.
Now, extending this idea of messaging, what happens as a parent if you have contacted the teacher and or someone else at the school and a couple of days have gone by and you haven't heard anything back? Understandably, that can be frustrating. But I think first off, it's important to stress there may be a variety of factors involved. The given teacher may very well be absent for those days. That teacher may be involved in, frankly, prioritizing a more significant issue that needed their immediate attention. Also, I found in my own career that teachers at times, they don't want to waste parents' time. They don't want to call back with half information. So the teacher may be very judiciously going through, investigating things, getting all the facts clear before they call you back. And finally, and this is one where absolutely occurs at every school at one point in time, certainly did at mine occasionally, where there's a breakdown in the secretariat and front office receiving your phone call, getting that to the mailbox in the staff room for that given teacher. Somewhere along the line, there was a breakdown. And for that, I know schools certainly apologize, but it does happen from time to time. So therefore, my rule of thumb, I used to always mention to parents, was I would give the school 2 days. If I have not heard back in 48 hours, I would call the school as a parent, but please call after school. So to ensure that that teacher, of course, is going to be available and not teaching. And also it allows you to ensure that you actually connect with the person yourself, that second call. All right, we are now about half done our webinar. The duration, we are going to use that time to look at what we call common meeting frustrations. Throughout our years as parents of students at school and as educators ourselves, these are really the 5 issues which from a parent's point of view can frankly be frustrating. Want to stress that it's all about how the parent sees or perceives the situation. So it's a classic case of it is certainly not the intent of a given school in any of these situations to cause the parent anxiety or stress. It's a reality, however, that sometimes good intent is not received in terms of the intended impact on parents. So that's what we want to address for the next few slides. So for these 5 issues, we're going to begin with symptoms, and we're going to follow that up on the next slide with suggested solutions. Now, the first issue is any school contact triggers stress in you as a parent. And that simply means that school was not necessarily a pleasant, fun, enjoyable place for you when you were a student. And the minute you see the school's number on call display or anything to do with the school, it's an anxious flashback. Number 2, you feel overwhelmed by educational jargon. You're trying your best, you work with your child, you regularly attend meetings, but you just don't get all these terms that are floating around. Number 3, you frankly feel like no one is listening to you. Everyone's pleasant, everyone's glad to meet, but you don't really feel that they're totally invested in the conversation. Number 4, you feel your child is being treated unfairly. Either your child's being kind of picked on or not being assessed fairly or anything of that nature. And I want to stress, these are not the reality of the situation, but these are your all important feelings. We get that. And the final one is you feel that no one ultimately lives up to their word. In other words, once the meeting ends, the follow-up commitment is severely lacking.
So we're going to look at the first meeting frustration, which is that any time that you're contacted by the school, you do feel that your stress level increase. And so looking at some of the symptoms and why this is occurring, and as Jaime mentioned, you may have had a negative experience at school that really is impacting you as an adult, that you don't view schools as that positive place to be. The phone rings, you see the on-call display that the school's calling, and it's like, oh geez, do I have to pick up the phone? I don't think I'm going to do that now. What on earth could they possibly be calling about? And it also, you have that lack of comfort and lack of trust maybe in dealing with any adults at the school building.
Alrighty, our recommended solutions for this type of situation. And I know this next one, it's a tough one, and words are a lot easier to say than reality when it comes to this notion of, but try your best to separate your own school experiences from a few decades ago from your child's present day experiences. Kind of release that baggage. It would benefit you, and it would certainly benefit your child. Each school year, your child obviously is a new teacher. Well, give that new teacher a chance. And maybe your child didn't connect super well with the previous year's teacher. Well, don't hold that against the new teacher right from the get-go. And occasionally, like every X number of years, you get a new principal at your school. Same type of thing, give the new person a chance. We would strongly recommend you make a real effort to get involved at your child's school. There are many benefits in doing so, but number one, it will help make schools seem like a very positive place to you. It will help reduce your kind of stress, which you might have been holding on for years and years. But also, it's a wonderful modeling to your child that school's a great place to be and their education matters a lot to you.
And another thing you can do is you could bring an advocate along, because they may provide you that comfort and support that you need. And if you do choose to bring an advocate, it's always important to let the school know ahead of time that you have asked so-and-so to attend the meeting as well. Similarly, you would expect that of the school. If you thought you were just meeting with the teacher and someone else is involved, they always will let you know if an additional staff or personnel are going to be involved in the meeting. But when you're thinking about who you could bring as an advocate, I really think you need to carefully think about the impact that person is going to have on the meeting. You want someone there who's going to be a support to you. Maybe they're going to take notes for you, or they'll help clarify information with you, or help you problem solve through what's going to be happening. But really be cautious that you're not bringing someone who has their own agenda that will impact how that meeting moves forward. And also, for some families, English isn't their first language, and certainly translators can be arranged, because we want to make sure that the message that's being presented by the school is understood, and also that your message is understood by the school.
Our second common meeting frustration is all about feeling overwhelmed by educational jargon. Now, modern teaching and learning is far, far different than from what you experienced as a child. And trust me, modern teaching and learning is far, far better than education was decades ago. It continues to be innovative, stimulating. We've embedded technology brilliantly, and there's many different options and approaches, whether it's learning or assessment. But the bottom line is it's different. So when you go in to discuss something with your child's teacher, it can be pretty overwhelming. Also, you just simply don't feel confident or well-informed of educational pedagogy. And I call it being buried by an avalanche of acronyms. You go to a meeting and you sit down and trying to really focus, and all you hear are things like DI and EA and IPRC and LD and PPE, and on it goes. that can really be overwhelming. And then it becomes increasingly difficult to follow the conversation. And then as an offshoot of that, you're extremely leery to ask any questions, because the last thing any of us want to do in some kind of meeting is to really feel or look uninformed.
So if you do find that you are being overwhelmed by educational jargon, one thing you can be doing is regularly checking out the school and the classroom websites. This will really help stay informed about things that are happening at school and some of the language that's being used. As well, your district will have a website which will have additional relevant information on a wider variety of topics. When you go to a meeting, make sure that you've written down a few questions that you want to make sure that you ask, and any key points that you want to ensure that are going to be discussed. And once again, if having an advocate there with you is something that would assist you at this time, then by all means, make sure that you have one to accompany you. And the biggest thing is really don't hesitate to ask for clarification or initiate a restate of what's being said. So, I think what I'm hearing is this, because really moving forward, the school would rather you ask a question than go away with the wrong message or being unsure as to what is going to be happening moving forward.
The third common meeting frustration is all about, it feels like no one is listening. And it feels like your concerns are being minimized, and frankly, that you're kind of being patronized or talked down to. It feels like everyone just basically wants to kind of quote unquote play nice, keep the peace, but they always seem to have kind of like one eye on the clock, and they want this kind of meeting to end as quickly as possible. At least that's how it feels from your chair. And meetings always seem to you to be kind of standalone formalities with really kind of, there's no clear commitment to follow up. And you get the impression that as soon as you leave the meeting and they close the door, that from everyone else's point of view, that's the end of the issue.
And so if you're feeling like nobody is listening, make sure that you're really clear about what you want to achieve during the meeting. Take that time to restate what are your concerns and the reason that you are concerned. But I think most importantly is you need to be open and honest with the school about what you're seeing at home, so you can compare and contrast that with how your child is at school and how they're doing at school. One thing I think that's great to use are the I statements, where you can express what you're hearing or what you're thinking or what you're feeling. I think what I'm hearing you say is this, or I believe that this might be a better approach, and explain why you think that is happening. And, really will help to kind of consolidate what's happening in the meeting, so that gives you a better sense that everybody is listening to what it is that you're concerned about and what it is that you're wanting to share, and what the potential outcome is.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Carole and myself are strong believers in the homeschool partnership, and that partnership really ties in very closely to this particular frustration, because it works both ways. During the meeting, it's important that to ask the school moving forward, who is going to do what changes are going to be made, and how will you be kept apprised of the impact of these changes. And then by the same token, you need to really clarify with the school and the teacher and ask them, what strategies can you use at home with your child to assist your child's growth and development? So it really works both ways. What are you going to do as a result of this issue following up this meeting? And what are other people at the table going to do?
And also, I think it's really important when you're talking about strategies, perhaps there's strategies that you're using at home that are really effective. Share those with the school, because the more we have a commonality between home and school, the better it is for your child moving forward. So we're going to take a pause here at this point in time.
Any questions?
And have that opportunity to ask any questions. If you feel that you'd like to raise your hand and ask a question orally, by all means. The Q&A is available there, or you could email us any questions. And one question that we certainly have seen in previous webinars that we've had is that, you know, I want my child to do well at school, but really, what should I do if I don't either have the time or really the skills to help my child? And when we look at this, you're right. I mean, you send your child to school every day because they are the professionals. They are the ones who are trained in how to teach your child. But developing their oral language skills and taking time to talk about things that are happening in the community or happening in the media or things that you're watching and reading, and using those how and why questions really help to build the critical thinking for your child, which is a lifelong skill that they're going to need in their adult lives. And one thing Jaime and I found was really beneficial was when we were out in the car with one of our sons, and you know, they'd be in the back seat, and this was a great time to have conversations because it really reduced some of the stress of conversations when you don't have that eye contact that you would normally have if you were sitting down at the kitchen table or in your living room.
And the authentic learning, once that gets kind of embedded into family practice, or as Carole mentions, in a lot of car trips, well, now we're laying the foundation for our kids to become lifelong learners, and having the confidence and the enthusiasm to become a lifelong learner. That is ultimately far more important to our kids' learning than any given curriculum or any given textbook or whatever the case may be.
So moving on, we're going to now look at, you feel like your child isn't being treated fairly at school, and you get the sense that the school really doesn't understand or like or believe your child, and you feel that their needs maybe aren't being met, and that nobody maybe seems concerned about the things that you're concerned about, or you feel that other families maybe are getting preferential treatment.
And I know in my career, in some families who have multiple kids, if one of the younger kids in the family is having some concerns, that as a parent, sometimes you really feel that the principal and or some of the teaching staff are really kind of holding grudges or looking at your given child differently simply because they didn't really like having the older brother or sister in their class type thing. And you also may feel sometimes, particularly if you're not really thrilled with the principal's decision, you may feel that the principal inevitably is going to side with the teacher. So kind of like, why are we having this discussion in the first place? Now, moving on to the fourth frustration, in terms of, once again, your child is feeling they are being treated unfairly. Well, solutions are really, I think, so important to really get, ask ahead of time, can your child be included in this meeting and discussion? And once again, it involves some planning. And in my career, a child has, I think, never been involved in an entire meeting, but depending on the issue and depending on their age, they are certainly, should be, frankly, involved in part of it, because it gives them an opportunity to get a sense of what's being discussed. And it also allows them to share their views, which I think are an important part of the process. And also come to these meetings or discussions with a few specific examples, a few specific concerns you have about your child's treatment. So rather than just sweeping generalizations that nobody likes my kid's getting picked on, whatever, it's much more impactful to say, well, you know, in the last week of this month, or in this particular day or whatever, or out on recess or whatever, this is what occurred. And then also it's also an opportunity to discuss concerns about ensuring consistency of consequence. And I know when I was principal, that's understandably, that's a very big issue for parents, particularly when their child's involved in a serious matter. They want to make sure that when everything is said and done, all the kids involved got an appropriate consequence. But I just want to stress, parents, that when you're meeting either with a teacher, the principal, or any collection of staff, they are there to discuss your child and only your child. That is not the time to discuss what consequence or whatever another student may have received.
And very similar to having an advocate there is maybe your child is involved with some other professional staff within the building or through the district level. And so maybe you might have developed a relationship with that particular person. And so you might wish to ask them to be a part of the meeting to help ensure that there's consistency happening between school and home. And reminds me when I was a facilitator, and at that point in time, I was supporting about 15 schools with addressing any special education challenges or needs that they might have. And it happened to be that one of the schools I supported was a school that I previously was a special education resource teacher at. And there was one family in particular that I had worked very, very closely with as we developed plans for their particular child. And so we had developed that connection and that sense of trust. And so an issue arose where they had a disconnect with the principal at that particular time. And so they reached out to me to ask if I could be involved in the meeting, just to help bring that relationship back on track, to make sure that we were having consistency between home and school, and that I could bring both parties together so that we could come up with a resolution that worked for everybody. So our last one is that you're feeling like nobody is living up to their words. You go to school meetings and you think that there just seems to be a lot of talk and very little meaningful action. And it could seem like that, you come away and there's no plan moving forward and nobody ever follows up with you. And frankly, you leave a meeting where you're feeling more frustrated than when you arrived. And that this meeting kind of ends and there's a lot of fake smiles and insincere concern, but nothing is happening. Now,
in terms of suggested solutions, so important to come to the meeting and really you'll be able to, as a parent, be able to speak in the very early stages of the meeting and just make sure you have your clear agenda, the key points you want addressed are really put out there, so for all to hear type thing. And also get a clear sense of what I refer to as the distribution of accountability. Bottom line is, as a result of this meeting and moving on down the road, who's going to be responsible for doing what? And of course, part of that is confirming that you will do at home to better support your child. And then of course, everything needs to be in alignment. So we're looking for some consistency really among the different actions and strategies between home and school. Now, to draw things full circle and bring things to a close, at the end of the meeting, you've already stated your agenda. So at the end of the meeting, what is the agreed upon plan? And confirm when the principal or teacher, and that will vary depending on the issue, when are they going to follow up with you? And you will contact them if they don't. So once again, as mentioned earlier, if you are expecting a call back in a week and you don't get it, by all means, that's your time to take the initiative. All right, so we are now done all 5 of our common frustrations. And this is another opportunity for any questions you may have. And one question that has come up, a couple of questions really have to do with the school's response to the COVID situation and how challenging students have found the COVID situation. And I think it's important to stress that COVID, of course, is unprecedented terrain for all of us and has been the last couple of years. And we are all learning as we go. And I think districts have been very committed to ensuring student and staff safety is first and foremost. But as far as any impact on, say, student learning, et cetera, everyone would prefer that kids are physically in school full time. But there's been an awful lot of need for virtual learning, et cetera, and a lot of variables in play that nobody wants to deal with, but I think districts have done a really good job of kind of adapting to a very different situation. And kudos to you too, parents. It's been extremely challenging for everyone involved.
So when we look at one question that we have is making sure the school understands the impact that COVID has on students, and the all the inconsistencies and changes, and particularly that their child is much more distracted now because of COVID. And I think if that's the case, it needs to be either that phone call that you're having with your child's teacher, or maybe a virtual conference that you're having with the teacher, any support staff that may be working. They can be providing you with some strategies that maybe could work to help your child focus, or maybe there's things that you're doing at home that know work, that you could be providing the teacher with those ideas as to what they could be doing to help your child be better focused. And I'm not sure in this situation with this question, are we talking with the virtual learning, which certainly has been a challenge, I think, for a majority of students, and being able to be focused on the computer for extended periods of time certainly can be a challenge. Is that different than the in-person learning? Is it that children are spread out so much and maybe not working as much in groups? Is that where the disconnect lies? And I think further investigation into that through conversation, or if there's other support people that your child can be accessing and you can be accessing to get some different strategies, I think those would be some good suggestions moving forward. And you asking for that type of help would be beneficial.
And I think certainly in the months and years ahead, both at the district and at the school level, all educators are well aware of learning gaps, which have certainly very much come up and widened, et cetera, during the pandemic, et cetera. And they will make a very concerted effort to, as I say, to address those over the months and years to come.
Okay, so just in summing up our webinar on communication, there's just some key points that maybe we really haven't addressed as of yet, and just want to ensure that we do mention those. And that is to really make sure that anytime you are in conversation with your child's teacher, your child's school, that the things that you're talking about and discussing are based on confirmed facts, and not simply things that you've heard in the community, or things that your child maybe have shared that somebody else experienced. We need to make sure that it's based on facts. When we are in conversation, everybody, whether it be school staff or parents, need to be respectful. They really need to make sure that everybody is given the opportunity to speak uninterrupted, and to really engage in that active listening where you're looking at the speaker, you're focusing on what's being said, you're giving them that opportunity to speak, and then you taking your opportunity to speak. It's also important that we use that appropriate volume, language, and tone. And certainly, I mean, these are our children that we're talking about, and we can become emotionally involved in the conversation and become stressed or agitated through that. And if that's the case, use a calming strategy that maybe you use, where you kind of take a moment and take some deep breaths to get yourself back, so that you're able to resume the conversation, or ask if you could just take a moment's break just so that you're able to regroup, because we really want to make that meeting as productive as possible. And it's so important to remember that any homeschool interactions have a direct and indirect child audience. Your child is always listening, whether or not you think they are or not. And so making sure that you're always modeling words and actions appropriately. And then finally, remembering the impact of nonverbal communication. You know, the crossing of the arms, the rolling of the eyes speaks volumes, as well as a smile certainly says an awful lot without any words. So just wanting to remind you about our podcast, Bricker by Bricker. You're welcome to follow us, and we can be found on Voice Ed Radio, Spotify, Google Podcast, iTunes, and iHeartRadio. And you're welcome to check out our website, brickerbybricker.com. And just a reminder of our upcoming session on March 16th about embracing collaboration, the third focus in our building of those productive partnerships between home and school.
And now it's time for some big thank yous. And first and foremost, thank you very much to everyone in our audience. There's lots of different things you could have done this evening, and the fact you chose to spend it with us, we greatly appreciate it. A big thank you to West Orange Public Schools once again. We greatly appreciate the opportunities you continue to offer us. And finally, our ongoing professional partnership with Teacher Coach has been wonderful for us, and we greatly appreciate that also. So to everyone involved, thanks very much, and have a great rest of the evening.